Hi, this is Jim Tolles, and today I want to talk about a difference between being conscious and being awakened. Now, obviously, the New Age term conscious has been kind of co-opted from the usual term, which in the usual term just means you're awake and your brain is functioning, and awake in the sense of that you're not sleeping physically, you're physically awake and cognitive and interacting with the world. And so much of what I do on the spiritual path is redefine things. So I'm not trying to set a definition for everything and for everyone else. This is just another way to understand how I'm teaching. And it's an encouragement for you to understand your own definitions, to stop and say, how am I defining these things? That's why I've had other posts and videos that have gone up around, what is God? What is ego? To really encourage you to engage with your own definitions, to understand, like, how am I defining this world around me? Because most of the time we're not using the same words. We think we are, and that can cause a lot of misunderstanding. Now, lately there's a lot of people talking about the awakening this, the awakening that, and I'm an awakening, and yada, 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 or I'm an awakening as a process. And well, my blog is called Spiritual Awakening Process. Spiritual awakening itself is not a process. It is. It is what is. It is that I am, that presence that underlies everything all the time. The process I speak to is moving from that space of being unconscious into being fully awake. How am I defining conscious versus awake? I define conscious as being interested in helping and being kind and being loving. And the difference between that and being awake is that in that space of awakeness, there's nothing to change. There's nothing to do, and everything is love. Right? So there's no process, there's nothing to achieve. With being conscious, a lot of people still want to change the world and to help and to do things, and that's a beautiful thing. And then that generally comes from that space of being more conscious as opposed to being unconscious and not knowing the influences of your choices in the world or what's going on, in result to you or what's going on in general. Just it's a real space of ignorance. So unconscious stuff is really very much ignorance versus the conscious is you're paying attention to things, and this is a wonderful thing to have. But not everybody who's conscious is awake. That awake where that shift, and suddenly it's like you know the truth, you can feel that inner stillness, and there's no doubt about what's true. And people who are awake can get caught up in that trying to be more conscious or be something, right? So this kind of striving is often inherent in people who are conscious. And this isn't a bad thing. It's just helping you to set a difference between the two, because the more we drop into that awake space, there's nothing to change. And you can embrace both the conscious and the unconscious states. And embracing means accepting. It doesn't mean you're going to become unconscious and ignorant again. You don't do that. But rather you just tune into what feels true to you. So it's really one of the most fundamental ways is the awake turns inward. The conscious is often still turned outward. From that inward space, there's often a rising to act in conscious ways in the world, but you're not going to define yourself in those ways for the most part. You're just going to kind of do things. Like a lot of things that I do as a spiritual teacher, I just do them. It's not because I'm trying to appear to be kind or conscious or any of that. It's just this is what I feel called to do. When I feel called to do something else, I'll do something else. So there's really the loss of the judgment and the value system. So a lot of people who are becoming more and more conscious, right, through self-improvement and through learning lots of different spiritual techniques. And once again, this is fine. This is beautiful. But they're still often in that value system of this is this and this is that. This is spiritual and this is not spiritual. This is good. This is bad. And the awake state, the more you have embraced it, the more people are dropped into that state. They just don't do that. It's like this is just part of this world. And so there's bullets and there's hugs, and they're just part of this world. Now, in saying that, the person operating from the awake space in growing naturally, there's so many things you just don't even really do. It's like the whole idea of like getting a gun and shooting somebody, to me, it doesn't make any sense, right? It's just not how I'm growing. It doesn't make sense to how I'm operating. But I'm not going to say that it doesn't make sense for another person. I don't put that value judgment. But I'm also not passive, okay? So it's not like you're going to say, well, everybody can do what everybody wants, right? That's another ego game that likes to run in, that's very confused because it doesn't understand the awake space, which is why I'm spending some time talking about the differences here. Because the ego wants to run and say, well, then you're just going to lie around and do nothing all the time. And, you just don't actually care, right? It sees it from a nihilist sort of point of view, and that is not the awakened space at all. That's usually just the ego just trying to giving up, saying, well, I can't do anything about anything. And it's still looking for a position that's defensible, right? An ideology that's defensible to justify how the world is operating. And in effect, it's trying to find meaning through saying that everything is meaningless. So that's more the ego games, and that can get kind of become the shadow of the conscious person, actually. People that are too caught up in trying to change the world and help men, children, dogs, cats, and nature. And as I said, this is not bad, but the shadow is not seeing parts of yourself, and the shadow of the conscious person is this other part that just thinks that nothing is worth changing, nothing is possible, nothing can ever be fixed. And it's strange, in that space there's those seeds of truth, but they're just so poorly formed and understood that they actually become lies. But in the truth of the awakened space, there's nothing to change. Everything is perfect. Everything is beautiful. So this is an interesting dance to start to understand. And certainly, everybody who awakens isn't at the same level of conscious awareness. So some people are incredibly unconscious about life, so they can wake up on the battlefield and, have been, a horrible butcher. And then they suddenly, realize in a stroke of light just what they've been doing. They've actually been hurting themselves. And that's part of that understanding of oneness in the awakened space, that we don't want to hurt other things because it's still hurting ourselves. While we can accept all things and all pains, like to inflict pain on others is still inflicting pain on ourselves. And we're not interested in hurting ourselves or others. So that's a big difference. So this is just kind of a general idea to understand that most people are on a conscious path. They're developing consciousness in themselves to be more aware of themselves, their energy, their hearts, their minds, their bodies. These are beautiful things to do. But that isn't the awakening path, because the awakening path isn't a path. The awakening is here. And it's always been here. And when you drop into that space, more and more, the doing, the moving, the achieving, the accolades, the social approval, because that's a big thing for especially somebody who's operating from the desire to help or to do good. They're looking for social approval back, or they're just looking for their own approval. The awakened space doesn't operate that way. It just moves from that space of love, and it shares as it shares, and it rests as it needs to rest. So those are some definitions to play with, and you don't have to accept mine. What I'm encouraging you to do is to kind of look at your own definitions. Although with being awake, I think that is an important definition to spend some time with, understanding what that means, to rest in that I am, in that space of oneness and love, and understanding that ultimately everything is exactly as it should be. You can find more from me at spiritualawakeningprocess.com. Once again, my name is Jim Tolles, and I hope you're having a beautiful day.